I started my music production journey over 25 years ago, and since then I've been signed to some of the world's biggest labels, produced, mixed and mastered music that has topped the Beatport and Apple Music charts, been supported by some of the biggest DJs in the world, and even worked on Grammy shortlisted music. And more recently, I founded a music production school that has helped our students achieve over 100 million streams. When I look back though, there are definitely things that could have been easier, especially nowadays with resources like YouTube. And that's what I'm going to discuss in this video, how I would learn music production if I could start over. Now, the purpose of this video isn't to tell you what I think about my career path, but it's actually about answering a lot of the questions I get from you guys in messages, email, and comments. Questions like, how do I get people to listen to my music? Why does my music lack excitement and energy? How do I go from a loop to a fully finished track? And why does my music sound quiet and muddy? So if I could hit reset and start my 25-year music production career all over again, knowing what I now know, I'd do things very differently. So when I was at school, music production as a career wasn't really a thing, and far from being encouraged, I would say I was actively discouraged to take this path. And this probably factored into me not really seeing this as a career for myself, even though there were clearly people doing it as a full-time job at that time. It was an expensive pursuit due to the equipment you needed, and I think a lot of it hinged on being in the right place, like some of the major cities, so you could meet the right people and learn the industry. Nowadays though, we can see that it's a possible career path. It's a huge industry, and wherever you are in the world, if you've got a laptop, you're seeing kids that just rise to prominence seemingly from nowhere. So it's definitely more widely accepted as a career path. However, it wasn't just a seeming lack of possibility. There were other mental issues at play as well, and these caused big problems for me. Now, these aren't just what I've experienced. I actually see these three mindsets in a lot of the new producers I work with, and actually I've had all three of them as well. The first mindset is just thinking that you're not capable, just not believing it's possible for you, for whatever reason, like I'm too old, or I'm too young,
or I'm too tall,
or I'm too short,
or whatever reason or excuse you give yourself. Unless you can find a way to move past that, you're almost certainly going to give up. And this negative self-belief will kill your chances faster than anything else. I've seen it happen so many times. The second mindset is that they have wildly unrealistic expectations. Like, I want to headline Tomorrowland within the first 12 months, even though they've never even finished a track. And these same people, when they get constructive feedback, they tend to just ignore it or think that someone's trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So it's kind of the opposite of the first mindset, which is just an overwhelming arrogance or detachment from what's possible in a certain time frame. And these people tend to also give up as well, as they realize actually it's a longer process and there's a lot to learn. And the third mindset is the kind of Goldilocks mindset. It's the sweet spot, and I'd summarize it like this based on our most successful students. 1, the belief that you are capable of doing this as much as anyone else, as long as you try and learn from people who have done it before and you're willing to put the practice in. 2, having a crystal clear image of what you want to achieve, even if you don't yet know every step that's going to be required to get there. No one really knows until you start. 3, being humble enough to seek and take on board constructive criticism. And 4, just really having a savage work ethic. Now, this doesn't mean working all the time, but it does mean developing a habit where you're working regularly and consistently. And look, if you're already a driven, confident, and humble person, good for you. However, I know from experience that most of us don't naturally fall into this group, especially as artists. And I think as artists, we're perhaps prone to the more negative ways of thinking than non-artists. The good news is, if you relate to one of the first two mindsets more than the third, you can actively upgrade your thinking, kind of like just upgrading your operating system for a computer. So reading books on inspiring or successful people, watching podcasts or interviews with producers whom you respect, or while simultaneously stopping watching depressing or negative videos. Now, doing this absolutely changed my life, and that's why I wanted to make this the first point, because it's a force multiplier for everything else that we're going to cover, and it makes it all way easier. But this is an ongoing process, so it's forming the habit of reading positive material and just having a positive mindset, which you can't just do once and then forget about it. Kind of like going to the gym. So step 1, I would decide with confidence that I could be a music producer, and then I would reinforce this belief by constantly maintaining a positive mindset and realizing that actually it's a longer game and I'm not just going to achieve crazy success in the first year. It might take 3 years, it might take 10 years. Now, from a technical standpoint, one of the first struggles that music producers come up against is learning their digital audio workstation. That's the software you use to make it. But this, as you're probably aware, takes a lot of time. You have to learn what each part of the software does. You want to learn what the devices do. You have to learn what the menus do and where the keyboard shortcuts are, and it's really quite an investment. Now, I've actually used multiple DAWs, including Reason, Logic, Cubase, Fruity Loops before it was FL Studio, and finally settling on Ableton Live. This was for technical reasons because the capabilities of each DAW was different back then, but now all of them are equally capable. So here's how I would choose which one to pick. First, I'd see which has lots of tutorials in the genre that I want to produce, or maybe even which one my favorite artist uses. And secondly, I would then download a free trial of that DAW and use it for a few weeks or a month. See if you get on with it, because if you really don't like the way it looks or you don't like the workflow, sometimes changing to one that you prefer is the right call, but you should do it early on. And then when I found one that I like, I would buy the full version of that software and just stick to it. Then you can get to know it inside out and really create the best results with it, without wasting time learning what is effectively another language. I enjoy lots of different types of music. In fact, I learnt classical piano, I've been in a couple of rock bands, and I've dabbled in producing pretty much every genre of electronic dance music there is. Things only really started to take off for me when I decided to focus on one genre. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, by producing, say, 10 tracks in one genre, you're not just learning production skills, you're learning the nuances of that specific genre, so actually you progress much faster. And secondly, you start to become known for that particular style of music, so you can start building your audience as well. And we'll touch more upon that in a couple of minutes. Now, it doesn't mean that you're married to that particular genre for life, but by focusing on it for, say, 12 months, you're going to get so many skills that you can then port to other genres. So if I was starting again from scratch, I would pick a genre to focus on much faster. It took me years. And I know that's easier said than done, but when you consider that music production is really complex, that's for a few reasons. One, you've got to learn how to use the software. Two, you've got to learn what makes a good chord progression. Three, you've got to find out why do these tracks sound much better than mine? What makes a good hook? What makes a good arrangement? There's so much to learn, and if you don't understand these basics, you'll always be guessing, and guesswork doesn't make hits. So once I'd picked my DAW, there's one thing I'd focus on first, and that is learning the fundamentals. Not just copying in random MIDI files or using loops, but actually understanding how chord progressions work, how melodies work. And you don't need to learn everything there is to know about music theory, but if you focus on this for just a week, you will be far and away ahead of where you would be if you didn't know any music theory. And I've actually created a course specifically for electronic music producers to learn these fundamentals of music theory and how they relate to electronic music, missing out all the stuff that you don't need to learn. So you can check that out below. Now, the next thing I would do differently took me years to understand the value of, but when I did, my music production life became faster, more enjoyable, and the quality increased more than it had done for the previous 10 years. Now, when I started producing, all the samples had to come from either sampling old records or a bit later on getting sample CDs from magazines like Future Music. Now, around the mid-2000s, sample packs started to be published and sold online, and I got hold of a couple, and I decided to spend an entire day doing nothing else but organize them into what I thought were sensible folders, like kick drums, snares, claps, etc. When I did that, my music production workflow got so much quicker, the quality improved, and nowadays you can even get genre-specific sample packs. So what I would do after choosing my DAW and genre is spend a bit of time researching the best sample packs and preset packs for my specific genre, just do a bit of research, and then buy a couple of the ones with the best reviews. Then spend 3, 4, or 5 hours just organizing them in a way that's going to make sense to you, having a listen to some of the samples, and maybe even marking your favorites. I guarantee this is a stitch in time, and when you do that, you'll use those samples for years, maybe even decades to come. Now, the next thing I would 100% do differently is probably the biggest cause of frustration I've seen for new producers, and it kind of stems from us all thinking that we're special and we've got something unique to share with the world, which is true, but only to a certain degree. Now, if you think to some of the most original musicians and producers of our time, you'll find that every single one of them has taken reference and influence from musicians before them. From Zappa and Bowie to Skrillex and Garrix, all of the biggest artists you know have taken references from those who have gone before them. Now, I resisted this for years, thinking that you had to be completely original. But the irony is, when I leaned into referencing and really understanding and trying to recreate the nuances of the music I loved, two things happened. One, my music got 100% better much quicker. And two, my natural sound started coming through anyway, because I actually had the skills to be able to realize what I was trying to say with my music. And I learned those skills by trying to recreate the music that I loved. So starting from scratch, I would embrace this from day one. I'd embrace copying and reverse engineer the pros. Now, I hope you're finding this video useful so far. I've got a quick favor to ask you. We're trying to hit 500,000 subscribers on the channel. So if you could just take a tiny second to click that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Now, the next trap I fell into, I would say applies again to 100% of producers. And it's not really our fault. It's just we're susceptible to marketing, but we must resist, brothers and sisters. We must. And it's kind of to do with things like Black Friday. We get caught up thinking that these new plugins are going to fix our sound and make our music sound good, but the truth is they simply don't. It's not that these plugins aren't good and they can't improve your sound incrementally. They're only worth getting if you know the fundamentals of how to use them. I've literally got hundreds of plugins on my computer that I haven't even opened. Now, this doesn't sound like much fun, but actually it takes so many confusions and overwhelm off the table. It's a really good thing to do, because once you know how to use your stock compressor or your stock reverb, you can at some point upgrade to something with more options, and then you'll know exactly how to control them because you've already learnt with your stock plugins. Honestly, you can make world-class music just using your stock plugins nowadays. So number 7 would be to learn my stock plugins inside out before I start investing in third-party plugins. Now, the next one is a lesson that I didn't really have a problem with starting out. In fact, I kind of had the opposite. I didn't have any teachers or tutorials or mentors. I had to try and figure it out all for myself, and that's simply because it just wasn't readily available. But nowadays, you've kind of got the opposite problem where you've got so many high-quality YouTube videos, so you can find pretty much anything you want about music production. But this isn't always a good thing. Music production is so complex, and there's ultimately so much to learn, from putting together your first drum loop to advanced sidechain multiband compression. And all of these videos are available on YouTube, but how do you know what to focus on in what order? The answer is you don't. So what I would do if I was starting again today is invest in a music production course that takes me step by step through the fundamentals in the order that makes the most sense. Yeah, it's going to cost you something instead of watching it for free on YouTube, but if you could get to where you would in several months or several years within the space of following a structured curriculum in 1 or 2 weeks, for me, that would be worth the investment. And how to pick a good one? Look at the reviews. And that takes me on to the next thing I would do differently if I was starting out today. When I moved out of my bedroom and started going to music production conferences and getting feedback from my favorite producers, my music just got way better way quickly, because people who knew what to listen for were giving me direct and specific feedback on my particular music. They've got to where you want to get, and their experience will allow them to see the pitfalls perhaps that you're making and give you some advice on how to avoid them. Now, I actually have taken this into every aspect of my life now. I always seek mentorship if I'm trying to learn something new, and it's completely changed my life for the better. So if I was starting music production again today, I would seek mentorship, but not immediately. And this is because it would be like having a famous author like Stephen King giving you feedback before you even learn to spell or put together a sentence. It would be a waste of both of your time. So I would spend the first 6 months learning from courses and furnish myself with that foundational knowledge before I would seek mentorship, where I can get really valuable feedback. And the final thing I would do different is probably the most important. Most new producers, especially younger ones, hope or think that they're going to get plucked from obscurity, thrust onto the main stage, and given millions of dollars to go around the world producing and playing their music. However, there's 2 problems with this. The first, assuming their music is good enough, you have to know how to be pluckable and what being plucked actually looks like. And 2, when a big plucking opportunity does arise, they're more likely to be taken advantage of unless they learn about the music industry and how it works. Now, this is boring for me as an artist, I get it. Learning about streaming, learning about licensing and royalties and how label deals work, but it's essential if you actually want to take part in this industry over and above just doing it for a hobby. Now, there's a lot to learn, and as with all industries, it does change over time, but by giving yourself a good foundation of how money works in the industry, how the different revenue streams work and the legalities of things like copyright, you're far more likely to have a view of the playing field and how it works. You're less likely to sign unfavorable contracts, and you're more likely to have a nuanced and practical view about what you can expect from the industry and what you can give to the industry to become pluckable. Now, out of all these points that we've covered today, I'd say that the first one is probably the hardest to overcome, but after helping coach literally thousands of producers over the last 9 years, there are 12 steps I've seen our most successful students take that set them apart from everyone else and gave them astronomical success. I've put these 12 things in this video here, and actually the first step I take if I was starting music production again today would be to watch that video. I hope you found this useful. If you have, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you over in that next video where we look at the 12 steps for setting yourself up for success in the music industry.